Well, good evening to you as well. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Cynthia and Monica and Priscilla. Good evening, everyone. There we go. It is great to see you guys once again. I appreciate you pressing through the Arctic blast to be here to join us this evening. We will be intentional and purposeful about getting out before midnight so that everyone can make it home before the temperature drops to -1. So it is always a great opportunity to be here. I do want to remind you, of course, that with all of our Bible studies, we are intentional about making sure that we have note sheets to go along with those lessons to help us with our growth and our development. Those can be accessed at notes.churchonpurpose.org. So anytime you go back and watch any old Bible studies, you can access the notes for those lessons on the on the website. And then we also want to remind you, of course, that we stream on Wednesdays and Sundays to our website, live.churchonpurpose.org, as well as our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, where you can subscribe to make sure you get all of those updates every time that we go live. And we want to remind you that at the conclusion of tonight's lesson, we will answer the two questions that you see on the screen. What stuck out to me the most from the lesson, and what am I going to do differently this week based on what I have heard? So here at Church on Purpose, of course, this year we have started this year with an emphasis and a focus on what we have termed God specs. And the idea behind this is that as we go through this year, it is our prayer that the Lord would help us to see what He sees. So whether we're looking at our lives, the lives of others, opportunities that we are presented with, challenges or obstacles that we face, we want to see all of it the way that God sees it. Because when we do that, then we will more readily and more easily be able to identify His hand at work in our lives and find the reassurance that He has not forgotten about us, but that He is still working intentionally and purposefully. And so on Wednesday nights this year, to begin this year, we have sat down with each of our leaders on Wednesday nights just to learn more about them and to have an opportunity to sit and to talk and to get a better understanding of who they are, but not just who they are, but why they do what they do, and how they plan and intend to do what they do. So we, of course, have now been through all of the rest of the leadership team, and tonight we wrap up our Connecting Church series, helping us to connect the dots between how Church on Purpose functions. We wrap up our Connecting Church series tonight with our Kingdom Education Coordinator, Mr. Quentin Rogers. Y'all give it up for Q. That was the best, worst audience response y'all have done so far, and it only took. No, I don't think you understood. I don't think you heard what I said. I said that was already the best. It was just the worst audience response, but it was the best of the worst. If that makes sense. So, yeah, 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 yeah. I appreciate you. We're gonna get there by the end of the year. I'm patient. I'm patient. I understand growth and progress and all that good stuff. So we'll be patient with the process. But we are glad to be able to sit and wrap with Professor Q tonight. And so of course we will kind of chop it up for a couple of minutes and then open the floor for any questions that you all may have. So definitely be intentional about identifying those as we go through the conversation. But Q, go ahead and just get us started tonight. Just tell everybody a little bit about where you came from.
All right. Well, good evening to everyone that I've not spoken to. Of course, my name is Quentin Rogers. Most people just call me Q. Of course, affectionately known here at the church as Professor Q. I am originally from Hampton, Virginia. I was born in Portsmouth, I've lived in Charleston, South Carolina. I've lived in almost all of the 7 cities back in Hampton Roads. I've lived in Newport News. I've lived in Hampton. I've lived in Virginia Beach. I've lived in Chesapeake. I've only not lived in Suffolk. So, yeah. But I'm pretty much from the greater Hampton Roads area. I grew up kind of as a bit of a Navy brat. My dad was in the Navy. We didn't move around a whole lot. The only places we really moved to were Charleston and Hampton Roads, and that was pretty much it. But I grew up kind of in the suburbs. There's a famous line that Dave Chappelle talks about in his comedy. I forget which one it is, but he talks about, how, when you grow up in the suburbs, kind of one of the things that a lot of black families that moved to the suburbs, that was kind of seen as a stepping stone of achievement, and so, but you still grow up, kind of like you would if you were living in maybe a predominantly black neighborhood, and so I still had a lot of the same kind of cultural things that going on as far as, growing up black goes, eating fried bologna sandwiches and grilled cheese sandwiches, grew up in the suburbs, and we were not rich by any means. My mom was a school teacher. I pretty much grew up in church. I always jokingly tell people I was born on the first pew, and I don't really remember a time where I wasn't in church, aside from maybe when I was, next to death, because if you were, well enough, you were going to church. So I grew up, I was nurtured in church, nurtured by the culture of the church. I was always around individuals who, loved Christ and modeled Christ pretty consistently. And so for me, my conversion, my coming to Christ was at a relatively young age. I was about 7 or 8 years old. I really began to live seriously, take my commitment to Christ seriously when I was in high school. I was kind of like, the kid that everybody knew was a Christian. I was the guy on the baseball team that prayed before all the games, and, people would come around me and they would like, oh, Q's come around, stop all the cussing and the acting crazy and stuff. And so, my faith was pretty known, by my peers. I grew up, I wasn't, a real popular kid, but, I was kind of like I was pretty much a nerd, a bookworm, did well in school, but I was real athletic at the same time. I grew up with a younger brother. He's 2 years younger than I am, and he currently lives in New York. And I went to college at Old Dominion University back home, and got my degree in mechanical engineering, and then I decided I was going to go to seminary. I went to seminary at Regent University there in Virginia Beach, and got my degree in practical theology. And I'll talk a little bit more about it here in a moment, but came out here to Omaha to be alongside Jonathan and Janae to help plant the church. And so, of course, married and got one son, Quentin Jr. And other than that, I'm pretty easygoing, pretty laid back. I like to read, like to work on cars. Of course, as many people know, I'm a mechanic. So, that's just a little bit about myself.
He memorized that from his Christian Mingle profile.
Which has since been deactivated since I got married.
Since last week, right? So talk a little bit about because churches there are a lot of similarities in black church in particular, but there are also wide variances in what a church experience is like as a child. So talk a little bit more about your experience in church growing up.
Yeah, so you all have probably heard the story from different people before. You've in church almost every day of the week. I grew up as what you might call not a preacher's kid, but a deacon's kid. My dad was a deacon at the church that I grew up at there in Hampton. I grew up in what would be considered like a black Baptist church, a Southern black Baptist church, pretty conservative in terms of its values and its practices. Kind of as time went on, it was kind of known as like a Baptist-costal church. It's kind of like a bit of a Baptist and Pentecostal flavoring all together. Growing up in church was fun. I enjoyed going to church as a kid. That doesn't mean I wanted to go every single Sunday, but overall, I enjoyed being in church, primarily because my friends were there, the youth ministry there. It kind of ebbed and flowed, but overall, particularly when you're a little kid, you go because they got all kind of activities going on, and the lessons are fun, and the adults seem pretty cool. And growing up in church for me, I was always, well, not always, but kind of as I got older, I was pretty aware of the fact that God was like working in my life, doing some special things. I just remember, there's some significant moments in my life as a kid. One was when it was the first time and it's actually the only time I ever heard someone speak in tongues, and then there was an interpretation that followed it. I think I was maybe 13 or 14 years old when that happened. And that sticks out of my memory because the interpretation of what was said, I felt spoke directly to me, and I was so convicted by what was said, I almost cried. And I was like, okay, God, I'm gonna get myself together. And I just remember from that point, pretty much growing up in church, being in leadership roles in a different capacity. I think I led worship in church. I was early teenager, maybe 15 or 16. The pastor came to me and he was like, Quentin, I want you to lead worship on a youth Sunday. And so, I got up and kind of did what might consider like emceeing in church. Kind of what you might consider from a non-church perspective. Read the scripture, asked people to stand up while we prayed. And dude, I was so nervous when so nervous when I did it. But that was kind of like the beginning of God kind of showing me that He wanted me to lead in His church. Because it's obviously not any one particular person's church; it's God's church. But that was kind of the beginning of it. From there, I was a leader in things like Vacation Bible School, taught little kids classes, like Sunday school, Vacation Bible School, children's church classes. Especially in Vacation Bible School, you got kids from all over the community that come. And so growing up in church was fun. It was a place I really grew and matured and learned a lot. What was really stressed, kind of in the black church back then was education. Go to school and, get good grades and, be a good student and that kind of thing. Those were kind of seen as like milestones or, what are those called? Watermarks of success, especially for black kids who kind of grow up in the suburbs, and you kind of grow up in this culture where, you're constantly under this gaze from the dominant culture, and you're trying to, fit in and do well and not cause any trouble. And so I did just like I was told. I went to school, did real well in school, was in the top of my class, and, always made good grades, never caused any trouble or anything. And so it was just real. I just remember being real good, being real wholesome. But also, I kind of got to see some of the ugly side of church. Jonathan could probably attest to this. When you grow up and your parents are leaders in church, you tend to be in places like going to a lot of meetings, or you hear the conversations at home, because you're eavesdropping or whatever, just about, how people in church are and how, conflict and things like that are pretty much handled. And so I got to see some of that, and that had that influence, how I kind of interacted with leaders in church, and just didn't go into it naive, basically. And so, but overall, growing up in church was good. It was a good experience.
So how did the transition work for you from being at home and being in a familiar church setting to then being at ODU and kind of being on your own and figuring things out? Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, so it was funny, like growing up, my dad would always say, when you 18, you go to school and go do your studies and go to college and all that good stuff. And so when I went to college, I was pretty excited about it. I hardly ever went home. It was to a point where my parents were like, "You coming home at any point?" I was like, "Nah, I'm chilling. I'm in school." And so I was fortunate enough. I think it was in my second half of my first year, or maybe at the beginning of my second year, that I did have a car. So I was able to hop in my little hoopty Oldsmobile and kind of make it across the water and through the tunnel and everything. But when I was at school, I was pretty much focused in school, primarily because mechanical engineering program was no joke. A lot of work there. But when I got there, a lot like other kids who kind of grew up in a similar experience of my own, there was a lot of exposure to new things. One of which was, just kind of that culture that exists primarily outside of church or outside of Christian circles. And so, I got there and people were like, yo, we going to this party or whatever. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll go. Man, for the first year of my time at ODU, I'm like, I don't know how I passed all them classes. Because I was at a party every weekend. It was like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It was like, all right, I need to chill because I got class early Monday. But, it was going to parties and everything. And my thing, I would go to parties, and I just loved to dance. I didn't, engage in, like, any of the drinking, the smoking the other cats were doing, but it was the dancing, the crazy, sometimes very provocative dancing that was going on. That was kind of my thing. And, just being there and being exposed to this new culture. I mean, people at ODU, primarily around my time, were coming from, like, Northern Virginia. They were coming from Richmond. Some people kind of came from down south, but it was primarily cats from Richmond and Northern Virginia. And so the culture in their cities is pretty interesting, and they brought that with them. And I made some good relationships, but kind of near the end of my freshman year was when, once again, I, encountered God. He just, confronted me when I was out there wilding and sinning and doing whatever I thought I was big and bad enough to do. And, just kind of really, arrested me and convicted me. And, once again, it started where I was pretty much on this path of serious commitment. And so I ended up doing a men's Bible study, or a peer group Bible study, basically, where it started off, I went to this, it was not a retreat exactly, but it was a worship service out at a church in Williamsburg. And it was through a college ministry that I got connected with kind of early. And at that event was when God had confronted me, and I came back and I was like, I want to start doing like a Bible study. And it eventually morphed into like a full-blown, men's ministry on campus. And I think it's actually still going to this day. This was back in 2006 when it started. And so, it went well. We did things like on retreats. We did community stuff. We went on campus and evangelized cats. I mean, we were on fire. We were on fire for the Lord. I got connected with an older friend of mine back then who was also doing like a Bible study, campus ministry and Bible study. And we kind of linked up. And so, we joined kind of our ministries together there. And the rest of my time at ODU, I was doing college campus ministry, teaching Bible studies, doing community events, helping to, plan worship services, doing things on campus evangelistically. But my emphasis, I really learned, that I had a, passion for like discipling young men and things of that nature. And so that's kind of been an area of emphasis and focus for me. But only that, really only that first year was like, it really was like first semester of my first year where, I pretty much wilded out, got it out my system, so to speak. And then, and then it was like, Lord was like, all right, now that you got that out your system, now I need you to, work for me and serve me. And so yeah, that's how it went.
So the title of that chapter would be From Dirty Dancing to Daily Devotional.
I don't know. I mean,
so from this day forward, thou shalt be known as Blattrick Swayze.
Yeah. Y'all can ask Priscilla. She can tell you some stories, and I don't mind her telling them because I don't really have anything to hide. I'm pretty transparent in kind of that regard. But I was pretty much out there. I was I was like in the gospel choir, that entire first semester, and cats and that thing was wilder than me.
It's nothing like rehearsing with the gospel choir at the club the night before.
Yeah, it was like you go to rehearsal on Thursday or Tuesday, and my wife, she then you go to the party and you like, hey, wait a minute, isn't that so-and-so from the gospel choir? Yeah, it was, because the gospel choir, and it was always a joke, the gospel choir at ODU was like, the black gospel choir was kind of like a rite of passage for, black Baptist kids, who went to college, so yeah, just a real interesting time, but, I just thank God, that he caught me before I went down the real bad path, so yeah.
So we'll find another opportunity for Priscilla to come back and tell us about the life and times of Blattrick Swayze. Um, so you said that your degree program was mechanical engineering. So what was it about your childhood, your teen years or whatever, that interested you about mechanical engineering?
Yeah, so I mean, I was always a kid that pretty much like took stuff apart, tried putting it back together. Was always really inquisitive, learning how things worked. And so when I was in high school, they had well, it wasn't shop back then. It was, I forget what it was. It was like a tech class or something like that, I think is what it was called. But yeah, having gone to that class, and then we kind of did some like drawing. This was kind of the end of the age of using stuff like slide rules and T squares and all of that. Because when I got to college, it was all computer stuff. But that was that's what really intrigued me, And I was like, yeah, I think I want to do engineering. And then it was always like Cass was like, yeah, you can make a decent amount of money. And I saw how much engineers made. I was like, I was like, all right, bet. I was like, yeah, I'm pretty good at math and science and I like making money, So yeah, I think engineering will be a good fit. So yeah.
So what was that like transitioning out of college into your profession back home?
So yeah, like I said, I went to ODU for mechanical engineering, and probably like 6 months later, I started working at Norfolk Naval Shipyard back in Virginia. It's actually in Portsmouth, and started working there as a nuclear engineer actually. And I always tell people whenever I say nuclear engineer, like, oh snap! I was like, look, I was like a glorified paper pusher. We wrote a lot of paperwork, primarily to keep the workers safe when they were working on nuclear subs and carriers and facilities and equipment and things of that nature. And so, I got to see some pretty cool things. Interestingly enough, at the time, I had started seminary like just before that because and also I really didn't even want to go to seminary, but it was a friend of mine, who pretty much convinced me that I should go. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna go to school. I was like, I'm not working full time yet. I don't really have any opportunities yet. So let me go ahead and go to school, because I really felt called and led to do so. And then got the job, and so I was like, okay, now I'm a full-time student and a full-time engineer. I was like, how is this gonna work? But thankfully, God bless, and it worked out. But being at that shipyard at the time was cool, and Jonathan knows, he can tell you I was working there probably for like a few years, and then just kind of realized I was like, okay, this is cool, but like this ain't ultimately what I want to do, because primarily of the restriction of my time and my freedom, was a big deal, and so I didn't stay there too long. I worked there for about 7 years before I moved out here, and then my wife and I we moved out here. But working as an engineer was cool. I got to meet some really interesting people while I was there. Of course, got to put my degree to work, but ultimately I knew that kind of wasn't where God kind of wanted me to stay, and be permanently. And so I learned while I was there, enjoyed my time while I was there, but it was going to be time to go soon and shortly.
So we got from college to job and jumped to moving. Let's back up. And let's talk about how Priscilla tricked you into being her boyfriend.
So that story is actually quite hilarious. So I think
there's no dirty dancing involved.
So I think let's see. Priscilla and I actually knew of one another. We went out back in like 2005. We were both in the gospel choir at the time. And but she was, I think, I forget what year she was in at the time.
She was a 7th-year senior.
But yeah, so like we knew of each other like in 2005 or whatever, and then we both got involved in the same college ministry that I mentioned earlier, where I was partnered with an old friend of mine back then. And so we both ended up in leadership with that ministry, with that organization, and it was from there. We were closer because we were around each other more and that kind of thing. And come to find out, it was a mutual friend of ours at the time he was over my crib. We were just hanging out or whatever, and he was like, "Yo, Priscilla likes you," and I was like, "What?" I was like, I was like, man, go ahead. But he used to play a lot, so I was like, all right, whatever, like, I ain't really believe him. But then I think it was like there was a time, it was two occasions where I was like, oh, okay. I was like, I think he was telling the truth. One time, she had contacted me about like needing some help for like planning something ministry wise or whatever, and so we met up, and
snatching them up with ministry.
and so so like she kind of grew up in church too. So like this is like for people who kind of like grew up in church for any amount of time. This is like classic. Like trying to hook up stuff like church kid 101.
Need your number
stuff.
so I can text you about this retreat we planning.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I got a question. You think you could pray for me or whatever? I was like, But yeah, anyway, so
over the phone.
We met.
Not in the same place. Not at 2:00 in the morning. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So like we met up.
There's some worship going on, but that's after you get married. Anyway.
It's church marriage after dark.
Church on Purpose Uncut.
Smooth. So
right.
Yeah, we met up, and so I was really into bowling when I was in college. I was going like every weekend. I'd bowl like 20 some odd games or whatever, and so she knew that. And so at the time, I think she was working at at the mission, I think it was, and so they have like a thrift store. Well, we met up, and she was like, yeah, she said, I was, she said, I just, I was kind of out, and she said, I know you like bowling. She was like, so I saw this, and I thought you might like it, and she pulled out this big old wall clock, like a big round analog wall clock that was like bowling pins where all the numbers are and stuff, and I was like, what? I was like, really though? Like, dog. I was like, okay, well, I appreciate it. To this day, we actually still have that clock. It's on the wall actually. Yeah, so there was that time. Then there was another time when she had this Dodge Neon, like an older Dodge Neon. I was like a 98, 99 Dodge Neon, and those things were a piece of junk. And so she had this, like, something was going on with the car. I don't remember what it was, but a friend of ours who was also a part of that ministry was like, yeah, you should hit up Q or whatever, have him look at the car. And so she came over, and it was something she said that I was like, okay. I was like, all right. I was like, I'm pretty sure she's feeling me or whatever. So yeah, I think shortly after that, kind of fast forward a little bit, we ended up started dating. I think it was like 2008. I think it was like 2008, and I proposed in 2010. We got married 2011, and yeah, it's been a great time. We've of course had our challenges, and still learning one another in terms of communication and all of that different stuff. But yeah, we also went to the same church back home as well, same church that John Janae came out of, and so we were in each other's company a lot, between college campus ministry, between church and all kind of stuff. We saw each other a lot. But yeah, that's how she tricked me. No, I just
my car is making noise when I turn the key. Can you help me? So, ma'am, that's a doorknob. So it was your hobby of cars that Priscilla used to snatch you up.
Yep, among other things.
So talk a little bit about your passion for cars and talk a little bit about your passion for cars and kind of how you're still using that today.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, like I didn't always like working on cars. My dad, he worked on cars. He worked on our cars when I was growing up, my dad my dad was in the Navy, but he didn't make a lot of money. He went in as enlisted, and enlisted guys, you got to work your way up, to kind of be making decent money in the military. And he'd be outside working on the cars. My mom would say, "Go outside, with your daddy, help your car." And I'd be like, "I'm trying to play my video games though, And so by being out there with my dad, I picked up some things. But when I got to college, I told you I had an older Oldsmobile. I had like a 95 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra. And it was a boat. I really enjoyed that car. I wish I could have kept it. But it was that car that was having issues. And so out of necessity, I had to learn how to fix it. I wasn't about to be able to take it home because, it probably wouldn't have made it. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to have to figure this out. This was before, YouTube was big and popping with a bunch of tutorial videos and whatnot. And so I went to the auto parts store, bought what's called a Haynes manual. The most vague, non-helpful thing in the face of the planet in terms of auto mechanic stuff. It's like, find your starter, remove this wire. And you're like, all right, where's my starter at? So that I had to pretty much figure it out. I just went and bought some tools. And from there, I had a few friends that kind of found out that I did work on my car. And so I'd help people out from time to time. But it wasn't really until I was able to actually purchase my first brand new car I ever had where I kind of caught the bug. I ended up buying a newer Volkswagen because I was like, all right, I'm sick of driving this Hoopty. Every time I get in the jank, it don't want to overheat. I can't drive it like 2 miles before I got to pull over, put water in the radiator. And so I said, I'm gonna buy a new car. I'm not gonna have any of these problems. And so, like a fool, I did. Spent my bonus money from my job, bought this brand new car, had a car payment and all this stuff. And I ended up meeting a few people that were in the cars, into like Volkswagens and stuff. And I started modifying the cars. And after that, it was it. That was it. I was like, man, this is fun. Cars go faster and they make a bunch of noise and you can make them look nice. And so I ended up doing all kind of stuff like modifying suspensions and, decorating the interior and putting bigger turbos on the cars and ended up going to like car shows and competing in car shows. And I just really went all in head first. And along that journey, having cars, all of them weren't working beautifully. I had some older, like classic type Volkswagens. And, just out of necessity, I had to learn how to do stuff. And so, that kind of developed, for me, a passion for cars. I was actually president of a car club for a while when I was back home, too. It was a bunch of guys, we drove European cars. We'd go for long rides and do meetups and stuff like that. And that was kind of, what really got me into cars was the car club and buying cars, modifying them and stuff like that. And having moved here to Omaha, just kind of seeing the disrepair in which a lot of cars are in North Omaha in particular, I was like, I wanted to use my, just my skills and my knowledge to really help people because, shops tend to rip people off a lot. So, just kind of wanting to help and provide that service. And so that's kind of how I ride where I am now with cars.
Shameless plug, our North Omaha business for the month is the Mobile Gearhead, who happens to be Blatrick Swayze, a.k.a. Professor Q. So if you need some work done on your vehicle, hit him up. Y'all should be proud of me right now because my filter just activated and cut me off from continuing that thought. Everyone should be thanking the Lord right now because he is good and he has answered your prayers. You've been fasting and praying and the Lord is answering your prayers. So talk about talk a little bit about the let me pause right there. Does anybody have any questions for Quentin before we move to this next phase of life? Gladys said, what was your favorite move on the dance floor?
Oh man, well back then, so this is like early 2000s. So like, anything like Yin Yang Twins, like that was probably the jam, like anything Yin Yang Twins, anything R. Kelly, when before we kind of got.
I was gonna say, are we allowed to say that?
You know, back when he was, you know, doing all his stuff. But anyway, yeah, you know, anything that, you know, pretty much got me on the dance floor with a girl. I mean, that was pretty much it. You know, and I mean, you know, that was, yeah. So now when Knuckle If Your Butt came on, I got off the floor because I ain't. No, I value my limbs and my face. You know, I ain't trying to get beat up. You know? Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your transition from Virginia out here to Omaha. How did you get connected with Church on Purpose?
Yeah. So of course, Jonathan and I have known each other for quite a while, well over 10 years. And it was, of course, you know, through Jonathan that I learned about Church on Purpose. I actually, at the time before he shared the vision of the church and the fact that, you know, he felt called to plant a church, I was actually ending, or matter of fact, I think I just ended my time in seminary. And so I took a class on church planting. And in that class, that was really where God kind of helped to crystallize one of the areas in which I believe he's called me to, and that is to support church plants. And, you know, sitting in the class, I learned a lot, but one of the things that was apparent was just the model that they were kind of espousing at that university. It wasn't really a model that I knew I was kind of going to be doing or getting down with. And so I kind of developed my own model, if you will, of how to plant a church, you know, as best I could based on scripture. And I was like, yeah, you know, I'm gonna help support and plant a church. Well, interestingly enough, I ended up connecting with a guy who actually had a ministry where he was responsible for planting churches or kind of planting Bible studies in urban communities in Norfolk. And I ended up going and sitting in one of their like orientations and learning about, you know, how kind of what their model was, and thought it was really neat. And I actually thought I was going to be doing it at first, but kind of as time went on, I kind of considered it more. I was like, you know, this just isn't the right fit. And so I think maybe it might have been like actually, but not even a few months later that you know, Jonathan had invited Priscilla and I to come to a vision dinner. And sitting in that vision dinner, after the vision dinner, I was like, yeah, I think this is kind of the best fit. Of course, the caveat at the end of the vision dinner was, is in Omaha. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, yeah, that's a ways away, you know. But yeah, I mean, my wife and I, you know, Priscilla and I, we had talked about it. I think we were just at home one night, and I just kind of looked and I was like, you trying to go to Omaha? She was like, yeah, we can go to Omaha, you know. And so, you know, kind of from there, you know, we ended up coming to visit once, and then I actually think we visited twice, and then we moved out here in 2016. But kind of the way God, you know, connected us with Church on Purpose and the vision that He had for Church on Purpose in terms of, you know, what God wants to see here in this city, you know, was just really kind of not serendipity, but I mean, it was kind of like, okay, I knew I wanted to get involved with church plants. I knew I was gonna, you know, do that. But I thought it was going to be local. Ended up finding an organization that did it, but it was just like, nah, this just isn't the right. I just knew it wasn't the right fit. And interestingly enough, you know, the right fit ended up being, you know, over 1,000 miles, over 1,000 miles away, you know. And so yeah, it's been a really awesome journey ever since.
So when we first started the church, so Quentin and Priscilla moved out in August of 2016. October 2016 was when we began service, and when we first started, part of kind of central to the overall concept and long-term vision for Church on Purpose is that individuals would identify their area of gifting and their area of purpose and be able to work in that area. And so it has never been since day one the method of operations or the mode of operations for Church on Purpose for me to be the person that's doing all of the teaching and all of the preaching. And that's because if that's the case, then you only grow strong in the areas where I'm strong, and the areas where I'm weak, y'all never get an opportunity to develop, because obviously those are the places that I'm gonna stay away from. And so it was always important for us to be able to develop holistically and make sure that we are well-rounded believers, to make sure that we get different perspectives in presentation from the word. And varied styles also help us to stay focused on content instead of delivery. Because we're, as black people, we get really, really delivery hungry. And we don't care what the content is, as long as it's said in the right key at the right pace, we going off and couldn't tell you nothing. And so to make sure that that we're able to appreciate the fact that the Lord can speak to us through anybody, through any style. It was always central to the vision of Church on Purpose that that preaching and teaching be made up of a team of individuals. And so I was grateful that from the onset, Quentin came alongside. And in the early days of the church, we would take a week at a time. So I would preach on Sunday and then teach on Wednesday. Then he would preach on Sunday and then teach on Wednesday. And we went back and forth like that for the first year and a half of ministry, until in our leadership evaluations one time, he acknowledged a pull and a call and a draw to teaching ministry over preaching ministry. And so during that time, we had a conversation, and that conversation gave birth to power modules. And so I picked up more of the preaching responsibilities to give him the space and the time and the energy and the freedom to be able to prepare these power modules on a quarterly basis for you guys. And so talk a little bit about just kind of that experience with deepening your understanding of kind of your purpose and clarifying your contribution to Church on Purpose, and just how that has the kind of opportunities and avenues that's opened up for you.
Yeah. So one thing that I really appreciate about Church on Purpose, and for those who perhaps been around Church on Purpose for a little over a year, 2 years maybe, or even shorter than that. One thing I appreciate just about Jonathan in terms of his leadership is just really his ability to be flexible. So like having grown up in church and having a lot of friends that grew up in church, one of the things that is relatively apparent is just this very rigid philosophy of ministry. About how leaders tend to carry ministry, kind of, not very flexible in terms of how things are done. I think, I'm all for things being, in terms of our doctrine and our teaching, of course, being by the book, by Scripture, and those things, the fundamentals ought not change. Those are non-negotiables. But in terms of how we do ministry, how we present ministry, there ought to always be a degree of flexibility with that. And so, when we sat down and we talked, just really feeling, more called to do more teaching, he was like, yeah, sure. And it's not because, we're friends, but it's just because he understands that, each and every individual that's a part of the church has their particular role to fill, their particular role to fulfill. And so, for me, that really, really helped, because then I was able to really kind of dive deeper into some subjects that I really was passionate about. Address some areas within our church that, maybe just needed some strengthening. Because in as much as, we love our church, and as much as we, strive to be balanced, we're not the quote unquote perfect church. We don't have everything down. Every area of our church is not down packed. And that's just because we have our particular experience, and we bring that with us to church. And so, that ends up getting poured out or poured over, spilling over into the culture that the church has in general. And so just being aware of that, it's important it was important and still is important for us, just to be able to take the time periodically throughout the years to address areas that we may not necessarily cover thematically throughout, for the entire year. Or areas where we say, we haven't really talked about this or talked about this in a while. Mm-hmm. Perhaps we should address that. Whether our power modules, are focused on things from kind of giving surveys of books of the Bible, to addressing particular doctrinal topics and subjects. Like we talked about doctrine of salvation, just talking about apologetics as well, like defending the faith. We did one on talking about family. And so for me, I really enjoyed crafting and forming those lessons. One, because in a lot of ways it really stretches me, because I have to tend to do a lot of reading and researching. I have conversations with people who may have talked about these things, and kind of get their feedback and their input. But then also, I just really believe it, really kind of helps us to be more well-rounded as believers when it comes to our worldview. Because ultimately, when we come to church and we're a part of a local fellowship, we're a part of a local fellowship not merely for the sake of our own benefit and our own growth and development, but really for the sake of our impact in the community. Like everything that we do in the community, we do from a biblical kingdom worldview. And one of the things that is important and I'm passionate about is really helping believers to see how when we're living our lives each and every single day, that we ought to view the world, interpret the world, interact, engage, and interrogate worldviews that we see and that we're around through the lens of Scripture, by the discernment of the Holy Spirit. And so, doing things like power modules gives us an opportunity to really, kind of clarify and clear that lens up. So,
and we're a better church because of it. I think there are some key elements to the culture and the structure of Church on Purpose that I think have been the largest contributing factors to the kind of growth and maturity that we've seen here at the church. I think reflection groups are one of those. Our pre-service prayer time together on a weekly basis on Sunday mornings is one of those things. But I also firmly believe that power modules are so influential in helping us to remember that there is a world outside of this space. Because it's so easy for the church to kind of get into their routines and their ruts and their flows that you then begin to forget that there are other things that go on outside the walls, and that we have to be intentional about being and remaining connected to those. And so, to come into an election season and to have a power module on the intersection of faith and politics, and and be reminded that our allegiance is to the kingdom above all else. It is a powerful and practical reminder, and not just be hit with it and then kind of move on from there, but to really be able to sit in that thing for 2 weeks, and has been an amazing opportunity for us to be able to grow as a church. And so talk a little bit about of course we had our first community conversation on Sunday that kind of sets up our upcoming power module that's going to start this coming Sunday. So talk a little bit about that relationship between these community conversations and power modules, and then go ahead and give us a brief 1,000-foot view of what we can expect from our next power module.
Yeah. So, my voice is cracking. So yeah, of course, the event that we just had, the community conversation we just had, we were addressing the question of, is Christianity the white man's religion? The reason I felt that conversation was important was partly, for one reason, it was because I'm in relationship and in community with other urban apologists who are all really all across the country. We had Adam come in; he's from Hampton Roads. I have a friend down in Texas. I have another guy I'm connected with, a pastor. He's down in Georgia. And then there's others that I kind of, know of and follow kind of from afar, from a distance. And, all of them are in their own kind of respective areas. And what we're kind of seeing is this surge or this emergence of what has been termed BRICS, or Black Religious Identity Cults. And essentially what these organizations or what these groups are about, they're pretty much seeking to address the reality of African Americans in America, addressing things that we struggle with and that we wrestle with, things like oppression, racism, or not segregation, but just suffering, things like police brutality. And they address these things in such a way where it disparages or speaks negatively about the church because they feel that for whatever reason that the church isn't doing a good enough job to address these things and to make the kind of impact that they believe should be made. And so much of what comes from that is this really, I mean, this pulling away or convincing people to leave the faith, to leave the church, to forsake Christ, you know, in pursuit of these, I mean, just straight up demonic, just all of which is, you know, just complete foolishness based on, you know, pseudo half-truths, you know, revision of history. And, you know, they'll say, like, just so here's an example of what I'm talking about. So an example was there was this, a gentleman, I'm in this forum with this group of individuals, with Christians who consider themselves, you know, kind of like conscious Christians, socially aware Christians, and people who consider themselves part of what's called the conscious community, which consists of people like maybe Hebrew Israelites, Comedics, Egyptologists, and just different groups. Well, a gentleman, he posted this graphic. I asked the question, I said, you know, somebody give me some primary sources of that you all, you know, use to support your worldview. And this guy, he basically posted this graphic that wasn't a primary source. It had a primary source in it, but the graphic itself wasn't. And he said, well, see, look, he said, look at this statue. It was a statue of an ancient Egyptian who was breastfeeding her child. And so he had that image, that statue, and then next to it, two other statues from two later periods. One I think was maybe from like the 17th century, and another was from maybe like the 19th century, where the two women were holding their children in similar positions, right? And so he said, if you look at these three images or these three statues, basically this proves that these two things were borrowed from ancient Egypt. And I was just like, no. And so like a guy that's also in the group, he posted, this was so hilarious, he posted a picture of his mother holding him, and he was like, well, I guess I'm plagiarized too. You know, because it's absolutely ridiculous to think that something like holding your child or breastfeeding your child is something that's stolen or borrowed from some ancient culture way back then, as if that was exclusive to that culture. And so things like that's just the one example, but things like that are used in a way to try and trick and fool and dupe and deceive people into thinking that one, Christianity isn't viable, doesn't have answers for black people. And so running in those spaces, but then also having been in relationship with individuals here in the city who espouse some of these things, I said, okay. I said, even though this is the Midwest and this is Omaha, this stuff is out here too. You know, like it's more than just cows and corn, you know, out here in Omaha. Like, no, you got cats that are literally walking around and, you know, espousing these worldviews that, you know, in my opinion, are just quite dangerous. And so I said, you know what, I want to be able to help to equip us before these things hit. You know, a lot of times what happens, and a friend of mine was talking to me about this, he said, you know, he's having a difficult time talking with pastors in his area and trying to get them on board with addressing urban apologetic issues. Now, down where he's at, I think he's in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, they have a huge, huge community of individuals that run in these different groups. And I mean, people are leaving churches left and right, you know, and he's talking to these pastors and they're like, man, you know, get out of here with that. You know, that's not really important. But oftentimes what happens is these pastors aren't really trying to get on this train until, you know, their daughter decides to join an organization or their son decides to become an atheist or whatever. By that time, you're like, dude, like, I came to you about this months ago. And so I wanted to take heed and say, you know what, I want to help to equip, you know, believers out here in Omaha before this stuff becomes mainstream. Yeah, thank you for that. So apologetics, so the word apologist, or excuse me, not apologist, but the word apology comes from a word in Scripture in the New Testament, apologia, which basically means to give a response or to give an answer or a defense. And so apologetics generally is the giving responses and answers to objections or questions that people have about the Christian faith and about Scripture and about God. So urban apologetics really is just like a subcategory of apologetics where it addresses questions and issues and objections, particularly that are particularly relevant to urban settings. So within, areas where, and it's not just issues with black folk, but it could be issues with any culture that's in an urban setting. There's a whole area of Hispanic apologetics to Hispanic communities, and so it's really addressing issues that are relevant to urban centers. So one is like poverty, addressing poverty, addressing systemic injustice is another. Addressing things like misogyny. I mean, all of these things that are relevant that you find in urban centers. We address those questions from a Christian worldview. So, yeah. But thank you for that, because everybody doesn't know. Yeah.
So it's going to be.
I didn't answer the second part.
Oh, go ahead.
So of course we did the event, and now we're about to have the power module. The power module is going to be focused on Black church history. So the title of the power module is "We've Come This Far by Faith: An Analysis of Black Christian Faith." And so what I'm going to be doing is, in this power module, I'm going to kind of be very quickly kind of providing a survey of Black church history in America, starting from like early 17th century. So like 1619, when the first recorded slaves were brought to the shores of Virginia, and just kind of tracking that history of the interaction of black people with Christianity in America. And so I'll be doing things like talking about how the first enslaved Africans did not readily embrace the version of Christianity that they were given. Primarily because it was a very truncated version of Christianity. It wasn't true biblical Christianity. But then talk about when enslaved Africans did begin to embrace Christianity. Why was that? What were the motivations for doing that? Of course, one of the things I want to do, I really want to dispel this myth that enslaved Africans only became Christians because they were forced to do so. You all probably, if you've ever been on Facebook for any amount of time and you got woke friends in your timeline, you've seen the meme from, I think that's like Amistad, or where the guys, kind of held up and the guy's holding the whip, and then it says,
Roots.
Roots. So yeah, our ancestors only became Christians because they were, forced to do so. Or you see the other memes that insinuate the same thing. Well, studying history, that is absolutely not true. I mean, that's the most false narrative that's been pushed among black folk, and a lot of people believe it. Even believers believe that. And so I want to dispel myths like that, but I also just want to kind of show the development, the growth, and also just the kind of the transformation of the black church over the years, because the black church today is very different in a lot of ways than the black church of the 19th and 18th centuries. And so, but then also just kind of pull out some lessons and some nuggets that the black church that we today can learn and glean from, and that we can apply, just to be effective in our own contemporary context. So, yeah.
So it's going to be a very informed. I'm telling you, you're going to get information over these next 2 weeks that you've never got in your entire life being in a black church during Black History Month. You about to get some legit black history. It's going to be super black. It's going to be black, y'all. Blacky, black, black, black. Blacky, black, black, black. So we're excited about that. So as we prepare to kind of close, of course, you have an opportunity to offer a declaration. And by filling in the blank, as citizens, as kingdom citizens at Church on Purpose, we will. And then just fill in that blank with any declarations that you feel in reference to our growth, our understanding, the knowledge that we build, the confidence that we find, so on and so forth. So as you gather your thoughts for that, I really want to encourage you all to continue to be intentional about your growth. We are this past weekend was the first time that we've ever, done anything like that community conversation. And you all know that the culture here in Omaha is, well, let me sit back and watch and make sure it don't burn, and then maybe the next time I'll see. Um, we were certainly anticipating greater engagement here in the room, but what was really funny was 2 hours within 2 hours after the conclusion of the event, that video already had over 1,500 views within 2 hours. And so we know without a doubt that this is a conversation that people want to know about, that they want to learn about, that they want more information about. And where we are as a church is we are positioned with the opportunity to be leaders in that arena, to help the church understand that we can't be afraid of the tough conversations, but that we can engage in these tough conversations from a knowledgeable platform and with love. That we don't have to get in the room and start fussing at each other and calling each other names and all of that kind of stuff, but we can have intelligent discussion and dialogue, and some of the greatest long-term tangible benefits that Quentin brings to Church on Purpose in terms of his value and how the Lord uses his gift here. You all have absolutely no idea how it's going to influence and impact your confidence in sharing your faith. We talked several months ago just about one of the biggest barriers to people being willing to share their faith is fear about how it's going to be received, and a fear of not being able to answer the questions or respond to the questions that people have. Well, this is going to be a place where you can be equipped with an understanding of how to respond. And even if you don't learn everything, which isn't going to be the case, he spends 3 months putting these power modules together. So you're not going to learn everything in 2 weeks, but you at least know somebody that you can redirect them to. And that becomes a great resource for us as we continue to share the gospel, as we continue to expand the kingdom here in Omaha. So we are grateful and thankful for the gift that you are to this ministry. And so as we get ready to close out, just go ahead and take a moment to offer a declaration of where we are going. So as kingdom citizens here at Church on Purpose, we will.
So, as kingdom citizens at Church on Purpose, we will intentionally grow and develop in our understanding of the faith from a biblical perspective, but in doing so, we will be equipped to intellectually, empathetically, passionately understand, communicate, and defend the faith. It's my hope and my prayer that for those of us here at Church on Purpose, we will become, in one respect, what I call professional finger pointers. That we won't necessarily be people that have all the answers, but we'll at least know where we can send people to get the answers. My hope and my prayer is that for us here at Church on Purpose, we will be people who have the very keen ability to foster dialogue and conversations with those who have different worldviews than us. Because at the end of the day, there are scenarios where individuals can be quote unquote argued into the kingdom by presenting nice little neat arguments, but most people are going to come to the faith via a dialogue or relationship that they have with another believer. And so at Church on Purpose, we're going to be the kind of people that are able to build relationship, and through that relationship be able to win people to Christ, to the kingdom, but then also just to be able to minister and to serve people in a way that is empathetic, that's understanding of kind of where people are, and really just represent God well and glorify Him, through intelligently defending and understanding our faith.
Amen. All right, y'all give it up for Professor Q, a.k.a. Black Swayze. So we appreciate you all joining us tonight. For those of you that have joined us online tonight, we appreciate you and thank you for your presence and pray that you have been both encouraged and blessed by tonight's conversation. And we encourage you to come back and join us for our power module, which begins on Sunday morning. We've come this far by faith and analysis of Black church history here in America. So we are excited about that and pray that you have a great week. Live each day on purpose. And for those of us here in the room, as we come to the conclusion of today's lesson, our hope is that it's been both informative and impactful for you. In addition to coming back and viewing this recording again to increase retention, we also want to encourage you to take an opportunity to reflect.
That's right. Here at Church on Purpose, it's part of our mission to help people understand their faith and live it. And one of the ways we do that is by taking time to reflect after each lesson. You can join us now in a period of reflection by simply clicking on the reflection button below your viewer, where it'll take you to a place where you can fill out some information and answer the same questions that we're going to be answering here in the room. Number one, what stuck out to you most from today's lesson? And number two, what do you plan to do differently this week based on what you heard?
Now, if you're watching from somewhere outside of the Omaha metro area, you can stay connected to everything that's happening in Church on Purpose by liking us on Facebook at facebook.com/churchonpurpose or by visiting our website, www.churchonpurpose.org, where you'll find additional information about the ministry, an archive of past sermons and Bible studies, as well as opportunities to contribute and connect.
If you are in the Omaha metro area, we'd like to extend a personal invitation for you to come and join us on location for either our Sunday Worship and Word at 9:25 a.m. or midweek Worship and Word on Wednesday nights at 6:25 p.m.
We look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, live each day on purpose.